Welcome to the International Relations and Cooperations course. This is the Day 1 lecture, and in this lecture I will try to provide a simple overview of the topic, including some of the key terminology, and I will also introduce some examples of international relations, both past and present, how international relations developed historically. The word relations is important in that we are basically talking about relationships, or how two or more sovereign states interact. This concept of sovereignty is key, and we will come back to this often. An easy way to think about this is that growing up, parents are responsible for their children and make many of your decisions. Eventually, the children gain independence and eventually make all of their own decisions. Same idea, but at a country or state level. So international relations is an academic subject, but it is also a practical framework for understanding and facing the complex web of interactions that shape our world. There are several theories in the field, but these three have been the most influential: realism, liberalism, and constructivism. Two others are Marxism and feminism, and anyway, we'll learn about all of these during the course. But I'm introducing them today because these are the tools and perspectives we'll be using to better understand present and past events. So it is important to understand the meaning, the difference, and the overlaps of the three terms: nations, states, and nation-states. So a nation, as mentioned in this slide, is a group of people who share common characteristics such as culture, language, history, or ethnicity. For example, the Kurdish people, who share a common language and culture. So the Kurds, Kurdish people, are a distinct nation with their own language, culture, and history. They are dispersed across several countries, including Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. The map in this slide shows how Kurds are spread throughout much of the Middle East. Other examples of nations are Basques, so the Basque people living in regions of Spain and France, and also the Tibetans. They have their own language, culture, and history. Although they're under Chinese control, it's home to the Tibetan nation. So in terms of state, state can be considered a political entity with defined borders, a government, and the ability to make and enforce laws within its territories. So the example here is France, because it has its own government, laws, and borders, but also Germany, Brazil, Australia. These are all examples of states, and we're going to be talking about states a lot in this lecture and also in future lectures. So what's a nation state? So a nation state is a country where the people, or the nation, and the political entity or state largely overlap. So in a nation state, the government represents the interests and identity of a specific nation. So Japan is often given as the big example. So the majority of the population is ethnically Japanese, and the government primarily serves the Japanese nation. So other examples are Iceland, and so the Iceland nation and state are closely aligned, and most of the population shares a common language and culture. And Greece is also another nation state. So what about Israel? So here are a few of the complexities. So the diverse population, religious diversity, historical conflicts, the Palestinian issue, also the national identity debate, and others as well. So But despite all of these complexities, Israel is often considered a nation state because it was founded with the goal of being a homeland for the Jewish people. And the Jewish national identity is central to its identity and self-definition. Again, though, the presence of the diverse communities and ongoing political or geopolitical issues make the concept of nation state in Israel subject of debate. So going back in history, we actually see the idea of international relations as developing quite early. So thousands of years ago, and a lot of the interaction, some of the interactions between the Sumeria or the Sumerian city-states of Athens and also Sparta are recognized as kind of the beginning of international system. And Thucydides was one of the early people to actually think about international relations. He was actually a general, but he was also analyzing the Peloponnesian Wars between Athens and Sparta, and trying to understand some of what was going on and the interactions between the two states, or the two city-states. So here are some of the terminology that you should be familiar with. And more recently, the Westphalia Treaty, which was negotiated between 1644 and 1648, is considered to be the birth of the modern state system. So this happened. These negotiations happened at the end of the 30 Years' War, and the Peace of Westphalia was eventually signed in 1648 by the Holy Roman Empire, or it covered the area of the Holy Roman Empire. So it allowed rulers to choose the state's official religion. It also organized some states and brought some states into existence, but also broke up or ate into other areas. So the concept of state sovereignty, which recognizes independence and autonomy of individual states, was the key concept here back. And currently, most of the world aligns itself along these lines of states. So, how many states are there in 2023? So, as far as we know, there are 206 listed states, and these can be divided into three categories by membership within the United Nations. So there's 193 UN member states, 2 UN General Assembly non-member observer states, and 11 other states. So 206 total. So we're skipping over quite a lot of the history, but the next big kind of point in history when we think about international relations was the end of World War I. So I'm not going to talk about what caused World War I or what brought Europe and other parts of the world into World War I. But at the end of World War I, after the defeat of Germany and its allies, the League of Nations was formed. And this is considered the first international organization focused on maintaining world peace. And despite this greater cooperation and everything, actually the League of Nations didn't work and didn't stop the world from going into World War II. So at the end of World War II, this is when the United Nations was formed. So this is quite significant. And eventually a lot more successful than the League of Nations, but at the same time, it has some shortcomings. We're going to talk about that in future lectures. But two other significant developments at this time, besides the United Nations, was the International Monetary Fund, so that international projects could be funded collectively, and also the World Bank was established. This period also marked the beginning of the Cold War era, which was characterized by the ideological, political, and economic confrontation or friction between the Western Bloc, led by the United States, and the Eastern Bloc, led by the Soviet Union. So the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s led to a unipolar, uni meaning one, a unipolar world with the United States as the sole superpower. So this era was marked by the proliferation of global trade. So global trade really took off, and the rapid globalization of the world economy. And we're going to talk more about globalization later. So there was a greater emphasis on liberal democracy and human rights, and many former Soviet bloc countries transitioned to market economies and democratic political systems. So here are a few review questions of material that was covered so far. So please consider your answers. This is important before we move on.